Sometimes the night drags on so long that sunrise feels like a rumor. Not just the literal nights, but those shadowed stretches of life when hope dims, silence deafens, and you're left wondering if morning will ever come. These are the in-between moments, between what was and what will be, between loss and promise, between the prayer and the answer. They don't come with announcements or clarity. They show up quietly, often painfully, uninvited and overstaying their welcome. And yet it's in these very moments that some of the most sacred encounters take place. Scripture doesn't gloss over the darkness, it enters it. It lingers there. We see it in the first tears shed in Eden, in Jacob's wrestling beneath a moonlit sky, in the silence between the crucifixion and the resurrection. We hear it in the midnight songs echoing from prison walls, and in the whisper that finds a broken prophet under a desert tree. These aren't polished stories wrapped in tidy bows. They're raw, human, holy. What's striking is how often God does his most transformative work in the dark. Not despite it, but through it. When the world goes quiet and strength runs out, he doesn't scold the struggle, he joins it, he walks into it with us. Not with quick fixes or vague platitudes, but with presence, with promise, with purpose. This journey you're about to take isn't just a study of ancient nights. It's an invitation to see your own darkness differently, to trace threads of grace woven through despair, to realize that what feels like the end might actually be the ground floor of something eternal. These stories don't ignore the weight of waiting or the ache of confusion. They embrace it and then reveal a deeper truth. The night is not the end of the story. Never has been. Never will be. If you're limping, doubting, hiding, or just trying to hold on for one more hour, you're in good company. And maybe, just maybe, dawn is closer than it feels. Number 1. When darkness first falls. Adam, Eve, and the echo of lost Eden. Before pain had a name and shame had a language, there was a garden, untouched, unspoiled, a place where the wind didn't carry regret, and every breath was borrowed straight from the lungs of God. But then came the moment, a choice, a bite, a heartbeat of rebellion that fractured everything. Darkness didn't storm in with fire and thunder. It slithered in quietly, wrapped in suggestion, dripping with half-truths. When Adam and Eve hid among the trees, it wasn't just from God, it was from themselves, from each other, from what they had become. They'd never known fear before, never had to explain the weight sitting on their chests. This was humanity's first nightfall, and it wasn't marked by the setting sun, but by the rising of shame. But even here in the wreckage of what was lost, there was a whisper of what would be restored. Genesis 3:15 is not just a curse over a serpent. It's a lifeline, a promise that one day the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. Light would break in again. It's the first thread of redemption pulled through the tapestry of brokenness. God didn't walk away from the garden. He walked into the shadows with them, clothing them, covering them, already preparing a way back. This story is our story. We all carry echoes of Eden, of what could have been, and what still aches to be. And yet even in our hiding, God comes looking. Not to scold, but to seek. Not to shame, but to restore. The darkness we feel isn't proof he's gone. It's often where his footsteps start to sound the loudest. Number 2. Wrestling in the night. Jacob at the Jabbok River. Friend, have you ever reached the end of yourself? The place where your usual tricks, talents, and tenacity just aren't enough anymore? That's where Jacob was. And maybe that's where you are too. Maybe you're not physically beside a river, but spiritually, emotionally, you're there, alone, exhausted, running on empty. And suddenly God meets you not with comfort first, but with confrontation. Because sometimes God loves us too much to leave us unchanged. Jacob had spent his whole life trying to earn a blessing that God had already spoken over him before he was even born. And isn't that like us? Grasping, striving, manipulating outcomes, trying to prove something to ourselves, to others, maybe even to God. But God isn't looking for performers. He's looking for surrender. That night, Jacob's identity was stripped down. All his facades fell off in the fight. What was left wasn't impressive, but it was honest. And God can do a lot with honest. Notice something? Jacob didn't win the fight. He limped away. He walked differently, for the rest of his life. But that limp, that scar, that was his testimony. That was the physical evidence that he'd been touched by the divine. And sometimes, your greatest ministry will come from the limp you tried to hide. So let me ask you, what are you wrestling with in the dark right now? Fear of the future? Regret over the past? A prayer that's still unanswered? Don't let go. Cling to him in the dark, even when you don't understand. Because the breaking might just be your becoming. The pain might just be part of your transformation. And your limp? That could be your calling card. The mark that says, I've met God. I've been changed. Number 3. The silence of Saturday. Between the cross and the resurrection. Let's talk about the day no one wants to sit in. Saturday. The day after the death of hope. The day before breakthrough. The in-between, where heaven feels quiet and your prayers bounce off the ceiling. Saturday is when you've buried the dream, laid it in a tomb. You've cried all your tears, worn out your voice in prayer, and now there's just nothing. But hear me, God is never doing nothing. The silence of Saturday is not the absence of God. It's the incubation of glory. It's the womb of something resurrecting. Because just like Jesus wasn't idle in the grave, he was conquering death, hell, and the grave itself, God is still moving behind the curtain of your life. Maybe you've been living in a Saturday for a long time. You've done everything right, yet you haven't seen the promise. Your heart feels bruised, your faith threadbare, and still no answer. But Saturday tells us something crucial. Just because you can't see the movement doesn't mean resurrection isn't on its way. The hardest part of the gospel story wasn't Friday's suffering or Sunday's celebration. It was Saturday's silence. That's where trust lives. That's where faith breathes its first independent breath. And that's where you learn to worship God not just for what he does, but for who he is. So don't despise the silence. Lean into it. Talk to God, even if he's quiet. Worship in the waiting. Keep showing up in faith, even when heaven feels like a closed door. Because on the other side of Saturday is a stone rolling away. And when it does, everything changes. Number 4. Songs from a prison cell. Paul and Silas at midnight. Let me ask you something. What do you do at midnight? I don't mean when the clock strikes 12. I mean the midnight of your soul. The moment when everything hurts, when hope feels out of reach, and you're locked into circumstances you didn't ask for and can't control. Because that's where Paul and Silas were. Not in a metaphor, not in a nice sermon illustration. They were in a real prison, their backs torn open, feet shackled, surrounded by darkness, silence, and the stench of injustice. And what did they do? They didn't protest. They didn't despair. They didn't sit in bitterness or blame. They worshipped. Not because their circumstances changed, but because their God hadn't. Hear me. Praise in the dark is one of the most powerful things a believer can do. Not because it changes God, but because it changes you. Paul and Silas weren't singing to get something. They were singing because they already had someone. And that kind of worship, it shifts atmospheres. It shakes foundations. It breaks things open. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. Don't miss that part. The other prisoners were listening. There's always someone listening to your midnight song. Your kids, your coworkers, your community. And when you praise in pain, you're giving them permission to hope in theirs. You're testifying with your scars that joy is possible, even here, even now. And don't be surprised if your praise sets somebody else free. The earthquake didn't just open Paul and Silas's doors, it opened everyone's. That's the contagious power of worship. It multiplies freedom. Maybe right now, you're in a midnight season. You feel chained, forgotten, misunderstood. If so, don't wait for the morning to praise. Sing now. Lift up a song in the dark. Let heaven hear you. Let hell tremble. Because worship isn't just what we do when we're free. It's how we fight when we're not. And maybe the shaking you need doesn't come from pushing at the prison walls, but from lifting your voice to the one who makes the earth quake. So go ahead, sing. Even if your voice cracks, Sing even if your tears fall, because midnight isn't the end of the story. It's just the moment before breakthrough. And your song? It might just be the sound of someone else's freedom. Number 5. The Cave of Adullam, David's sanctuary for the discontented. Let's be honest. When we think about the journey to greatness, caves don't usually make the highlight reel. But that's exactly where we find David, anointed but not yet appointed, called by God but hunted by man. The same boy who stood tall before Goliath was now crouching low in the shadows of a cave. Why? Because calling doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like hiding, sometimes it looks like running, and sometimes it looks like sitting in the dark, wondering if the promise was even real. That's Adullam, a place where dreams feel delayed, where vision feels blurred, where your heart whispers, "God, did you forget about me?" But God hadn't forgotten David, and he hasn't forgotten you. In fact, the cave was part of the plan. Look at who shows up there. The distressed, the indebted, the discontented, broken men with broken stories. But don't miss this. God didn't send an army, he sent raw material, and in the hands of a man after God's own heart. That raw material would become a force to be reckoned with. David didn't just survive in the cave, he forged a movement. Here's the truth. The cave tests your character long before the crown tests your capacity. Will you still lead when there's no stage? Will you still worship when there's no crowd? Will you still believe when the promise looks nothing like your present? Because leadership isn't proven in palaces. It's proven in caves. And maybe you're there now, surrounded by what feels like chaos, leading people who feel more like problems than partners, questioning if this messy, dark, hidden place is really where God wants you. But the cave is not the end. It's the classroom. In Adullam, David learned how to weep before the Lord, how to encourage himself in God, how to listen in the silence, how to sharpen misfits into warriors. He learned that authority doesn't come from position, it comes from presence, and that waiting on God isn't weakness, it's warfare. So if you feel stuck in a cave, don't despise it, embrace it, because the cave doesn't cancel the calling, it confirms it. God is still shaping you, still surrounding you with the right people, even if they come wrapped in problems. And when you come out, you won't be the same. You'll be forged, faithful, ready to carry the weight of destiny. Not with arrogance, but with humility, born from hiddenness. Because God still raises kings in caves, and the ones who learn to lead in the dark, they shine the brightest in the light. Number 6. A prophet's breakdown. Elijah under the broom tree. Have you ever had a moment where everything just broke? Not because you sinned, not because you doubted, but because you were tired. Soul tired. The kind of tired where you don't want to quit the mission, you just don't know how to keep moving. That's where we find Elijah. Not on a mountain calling down fire, but in the wilderness, curled up under a broom tree, whispering, "It's enough, Lord, take my life." Let that settle in. A prophet, a miracle worker, a man of God crushed by the weight of it all. Because even warriors of faith can burn out. He had just seen fire fall from heaven, had watched idols fall and false prophets silenced. But now, he feels invisible, defeated, done. And you know what? Some of us can relate more to Elijah under the tree than Elijah on the mountaintop. We're showing up for everyone else, but privately unraveling. We fought the good fight, but the fight has taken a toll. And here's the miracle. God doesn't shame Elijah for feeling this way. He doesn't say, "Where's your faith?" or "You should know better." He sends an angel with a meal, twice. He lets him sleep. He lets him breathe. God knows Elijah doesn't need a battle plan. He needs a break. And maybe so do you. Because sometimes the holiest thing you can do isn't another ministry assignment. It's take a nap, eat something, turn off your phone, go outside, breathe in grace. Let yourself be human in the presence of a compassionate God. But God doesn't leave Elijah in the wilderness. He meets him there, then calls him deeper up the mountain. And it's there in a moment of divine intimacy that Elijah encounters God, not in fire, Not an earthquake, not in drama, but in a whisper. A still small voice. Can I tell you something? Sometimes the most spiritual moments aren't loud or showy. They're quiet, personal, sacred. When God speaks not to the crowd, but straight to your weary soul. And what does he whisper? You're not done. You're not alone. I'm not through with you yet. Elijah thought the story was over, that he was a failure, that his best days were behind him. But God handed him new assignments, new people to anoint, new generations to raise up, and a gentle reminder that he wasn't the only one still standing. There were thousands who hadn't bowed their knee. So if you're under your own broom tree right now, done, discouraged, drowning in fatigue, hear this. God sees you. He's not disappointed. He's drawing near, not to push you, but to care for you. He knows the path has been hard. He knows you're not weak, you're weary, and he's here with bread for your body and whispers for your heart. You may feel like you're at the end, but heaven says you're just getting started. Number 7. Thorn-pierced grace. Paul's unanswered plea. Paul had seen things most of us only dream of. Visions of heaven, revelations too deep for words. Yet even he carried something he couldn't pray away. He called it a thorn in his flesh. We're never told exactly what it was, only that it hurt, and that he begged God 3 times for it to be taken. Each time the silence thundered back with the same answer, no. But it wasn't a harsh denial, it was an invitation. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God didn't remove the pain, he redefined it. The thorn wasn't a punishment. It was a portal, a place where divine strength met human fragility. Paul's breakthrough didn't come from relief, it came from revelation, that the very thing he wanted gone was now the place where heaven's power showed up strongest. This flips everything. In a world obsessed with fixing, escaping, and numbing weakness, God leans in. He doesn't always remove the thorn, but he always fills the gap with grace. Not thin, surface-level comfort. Deep, sustaining grace. The kind that steadies shaking hands and strengthens worn-out hearts. Weakness isn't something to hide. It's where God gets loud. And if the thorn stays, so does his power. Conclusion. No shadow is deep enough to block the sunrise. The Creator has already scheduled. Every story in this journey has walked through darkness. But none of them stayed there. From Eden's echo to the Jabbok wrestling mat. From prison songs to whispered reassurances under desert trees, one truth threads them all together. God does not abandon people in the dark. He meets them there. He speaks, wrestles, heals, and sometimes simply sits in the silence with us. You may not choose your night, but you can hold fast to the promise buried inside it. Morning is coming. Not always fast, not always in the way you expect, but it's coming. And often by the time the sun rises, you're not the same person you were when the night began. So if you're in a cave, a prison, a waiting room, or beneath your own broom tree, know this, there's purpose in the pause, there's glory in the grit, and the darkness you fear may just become the sacred space where grace gets the loudest. Because no shadow is deep enough to block the sunrise. The Creator has already scheduled. It's not a rumor, it's a promise.